It's that time already. It's 11:20. This is the last session of the morning, the last session of the Developer Toolkit track. And it is a panel. Don't worry, there's a happy ending. Stories from the front line of prototyping. We're all good. And Bryan, hi to Simone. I can see you on the screen.
Thank you.
And we have our three guys here. We are ready to go. So let me introduce myself as well. I'm Daniel Griffiths. I'm the editor of BeyondGames.biz and BlockchainGamer.biz. And I'm going to be leading the discussion here. I'll probably stay here, actually, so that I can see the screen and chat to Simone and Bryan as well. So hopefully we're going to learn a thing or two and it's all going to be good. Oh, you want me to sit? I need to sit down just so I can get on the screen. Not a problem. I'll join you down here. Fantastic. All good? Oh, crumbs. Still getting used to these headphones. So we had a great prototype. We had a great presentation, don't know whether you were around earlier on, from Isaac Sanchez, who went through his prototyping things, which is a fantastic sort of introduction and giving a great highlight into the kind of things that people need to bear in mind. So I want to just set off with a very, very broad topic. What even is a prototype? And what do you consider the best way of prototyping? Let's go left to right with yourself, Antti.
All right. Is the microphone on?
Yeah, little intros and who you are and what you do would be good before kicking off. Go for it.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Antti Lax. I am the lead designer at Wondershop, where we are developing this community game for children of 7 to 12. It's based on physical locations, and we are merging real-world activities with digital rewards and making these children engage with their communities. As for the question, what are the prototypes? I think that prototypes are basically proof of concept to validate your hypothesis, and I think that Isaac's definition was something similar in this morning. And I think, in general, approaching a good prototype depends on what's the scope of it, and I think that's going to be something we're going to discuss later today.
Cool. Take it home.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Wonderful. So my name is Daniel Rantala, and I'm Business Development Director at Fingersoft. Essentially, our company is known for the almost infamous hill climb racing IP. So we have quite recently gone past 2 billion downloads worldwide, globally, across all the platforms. And as for the question, I would say that at least in the free-to-play mobile gaming field, a prototype is essentially basically what Antti was just saying. So for an example, within our company, we consider a prototype to be simply the core gameplay of a game. So we just need to see the fun factor of the game. So basically, the developers will develop some kind of short, easy-to-develop version where we'll be able to check whether the game feels fun or not for the core gameplay. Meta gameplay will come later, monetization will come later, but it's more about just seeing, as Antti was saying, essentially validating whether it's validating the hypothesis and finding out whether it's a good and fun game or not.
So hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
We're good.
So my name is Filipp. I'm founder of Black Snowflake Games. We're a game development studio focusing on developing HTML5 games for social platforms and web. So our experience may differ from developers of native mobile games. So maybe I can give some useful tips from my point of view because, HTML5 games are much faster to develop and publish an average mobile game. So we have some differences, and I think I can, as I've said, I can give some tips regarding my point of view. Okay.
Cool. Simone, would you like to go ahead first?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Sim. I'm a lead designer at Ripstone. I've got about 13 years of industry experience. I'm actually really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of prototyping, especially non-digital. I can't wait to hear what everyone else has got to say about that. And yeah, about the question, I do love how we've all got different perspectives here about this. To me, it's about taking an idea and turning it into a shared experience. And the way I approach it, it's kind of, I've got a little acronym, it's called Not Deep. And it's never overthink, design, explore, evaluate and play. And I completely agree with the panelists here that what they've said so far. It's about creating, it answers those questions, doesn't it? Is this a good idea? Would this work? How does it feel? And most importantly, is it fun?
Yeah. Bryan, what's your take?
Yeah, sure. First, a little intro. I'm Bryan, one of the co-founders, CTO, and essentially the lead developer of Amata World. And we're building an sort of augmented reality gaming platform thing that's trying to connect physical and digital spaces as well. But we're focused a lot on culture, events, history, things like that. And yeah, what my take on prototypes, like I agree with what all the panelists here said. I think we all have very similar ideas what prototype is. For me, it's really about like testing, an idea for a feature or a small part of like the overall experience in a very, how do you say, lo-fi way. You don't want to distract people from what you're trying to test. You're trying to be really focused. So yeah, keeping the scope focus is a big thing.
So prototyping is often seen as kind of a hyper-casual gaming thing as regards trying multiple versions of multiple things all at the same time. How important is it for, if you're not working on a hyper-casual game, is it just a hyper-casual thing, or is it a necessary part of every kind of development?
No, I think prototyping is absolutely necessary for any kind of development. And like I said earlier, it's about scoping. So what are you trying to prove? You might be prototyping your core loop to make sure that that's fun, but you might also be prototyping on a feature level. That, okay, we are adding a new minigame to our game that is removed from the core loop. Does that work well? Is that fun as well? So no, there's definitely a lot of prototyping that goes around throughout the lifetime of a game, especially if we're talking about a game that is in a long-term development. You might come up with a lot of new ideas that you need to prototype constantly. So no, I think it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, Daniel, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, are hyper-casual games prototypes that are just being released? Just kidding, not really. Of course, like no matter what kind of game you're creating, whether it's a physical game or digital game, hyper-casual, mid-core, hardcore, whatever, console game, obviously prototyping is of utmost importance, because otherwise you won't be able to actually understand whether your game works or not. Is it fun? Is it functional? Should we develop it further, or what the hell should we be doing from here on out? So for hyper-casual games, I'm no expert in the field, on the casual gaming side for sure. But for hyper-casual games, I would say that it's exactly as important as in any other game genre. If you're developing a match 3 game or a merge game, blast game, a strategy game, RPG, whatever, if you don't do the prototyping first, then you won't be able to understand whether you should be continuing with the project or not. So I would say that absolutely prototyping is of utmost importance.
Yeah, of course, I have to agree with previous speakers. I just have to add that maybe hyper-casual John, you can test on live audience much earlier than or in mid-core games or hardcore games, because in hyper-casual you can develop a prototype in like 2 or 1 or even a single day, and just record a gameplay video and do a CPI test, maybe by yourself, but in most cases with the help of a publisher. But when you speak about more mature games, as I said, mid-core games, then maybe you can do playtests in your team before releasing, because those games are being developed for much longer times, and you just probably can't afford to test it quickly on live audience. Okay.
Yeah, Simone, do you want to take that one on?
There's some really. I completely agree with everybody there. Some really good points raised. I do think prototyping is for all game development. It's not just for the hyper-casual. It's, as I've said, it's like the quickest way to get an idea to an experience, and it doesn't really matter how big or small that game is. If it's a large game, you can prototype small scale. From the micro features, from literally like walk cycles up to a full meta game economy, and you can also bring them all little micro ones together. And as I've said before about that not deep thing, the design is, what is it you want to create? Have a good idea, but be really flexible from the beginning. Allowing yourself that flexibility at the start will literally save you time later on. And again, like was just saying, explore your idea. Make sure you don't tunnel vision. so that you can iterate as fast as possible. Because if you get tunnel vision, you're not gonna get that adaptability. And make sure you're evaluating as you go along. Is it good? Ask other opinions what they think. I think it's really good to bring other opinions into it and get different perspectives. And then lastly, play it over and over again just to feel it. And again, iterating, allowing other people to play your game and your prototype is really valuable.
Bryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I agree with the rest of the panelists again. Prototyping is not just for hyper-casual games. I think hyper-casual is, it's maybe really well suited to prototyping because it's really easy to knock out a couple of ideas for that. But yeah, just because it's, not easy doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because I think prototyping gives us the answer to the very difficult question of, is this fun? Is the experience right? And we just need to be really focused when we create these prototypes, what kind of ideas we're testing, things like that. So yeah, I think it can be applicable to all different types of development.
So Simone touched on the point about moving fast and iterating quickly, and the role of prototypes in that is obviously important. How fast can you move with a prototype? When should you start prototyping? And when are you kind of wasting your time, spending too much time building the prototype? When do you need to build your first prototype, and how useful can that be?
That's a good question. I think that I would probably answer that you need to start from a prototype once you have developed a good idea that you are trying to test, because before that you're not really sure what you're testing and what you're prototyping. As for the fastness and how fast you can start making new prototypes, I suppose once you have figured out that you have gotten the answer to your original question. So once you know that, okay, this is the thing we need, then we can continue developing on that feature or that mechanic, and then continue with a new hypothesis, and then continue with a new prototype. And if the answer is that this doesn't work, then you might have to scrap it and continue with a new one.
I entirely agree. I do have a question for the audience. So, how many of you have invested tremendous amounts of time and money to prototyping that actually never yielded any, profit? Please raise your hand if you have spent money, spent hours on useless prototyping. Figured as much. So, actually, quite many people. I would say that there is no time limit per se for a prototype. It doesn't really matter, exactly how long you spend working on it. As long as you have a question, I completely agree with Antti that you need to find out the initial question, like, is this fun? Is a good question usually, or can this be, or does this feel better than your competitor? Or it can be any kind of thing that you actually decide to ask yourself. So feel free to invest as much time and money as you need, but after a certain time frame, it's bound to be a situation where you will have to cut the prototyping if you just can't make the gameplay feel fun, and if somehow it feels like you're just repeating the same things, you're just repeating the same mistakes, just trying to find, reinventing the bike again and again, then at least at that stage would be the moment to consider that now I think I might actually move on to the next prototype. But anyway, so basically my point here is that some people, especially in the hyper-casual industry, they talk about 2 weeks iterations for prototypes or stuff like that. I would say that that's complete bullshit in the sense that you can keep on investing as much time as you need in order to validate your hypothesis. So don't be constrained by the time or these kind of industry rules that some super popular developers or publishers keep on saying. So as long as you have the question and then you get the answer for it.
So from my experience, our prototyping usually takes a couple of days if we're speaking about developing a game from scratch. But if we have an approved prototype and we are thinking about adding some features to it, like new gameplay features, maybe some graphical changes or something else, those things can take much more because we are testing from live audience and we need to check the metrics. So, for example, we added a new gameplay element to the live game, and we launched it, and we need a week to see how our audience react to this. Maybe we can see which metric has changed for the audience who got the feature versus the audience who didn't got the features, which is done via A/B tests. So in fact, it depends what do we mean by prototyping.
Yeah, Simone. When's too early to start prototyping, and when should you just give it up and stop?
Well, about the fasting, for me, it can be literally minutes. I'm currently working on the Queen's Gambit, and before even a single line of code was written, we was prototyping puzzles in the office with colleagues on real boards. So that was particularly fast. These puzzles could be literally set up and get feedback directly. Is it too hard? Is it too easy? We can literally just change it right in front of them and go, right, try that one. And I understand that not every developer will be working on a game where they've got a real life version, but you'll have to get creative, get out the Lego, the paper, the scissors, or the post-its and the blank cards. I think you can do, if you can't do non-digital, then rapid prototyping is really good. I think the panelists have already picked up on it, that don't limit yourself in time as well. But for small scales, I think, rapid prototyping, which can be anything from like 1 to 2 days or even 2 weeks. And just to reiterate before, to be fast, I think you have to be flexible from the beginning, right? You've got to allow yourself that adaptability in the prototype from the beginning, so that you're not doing that later on. Get the foundations solid before that you put more iterations into it, if you will.
Yeah, Bryan, what do you think?
I agree with most of what the panelists said, except one thing, which is time. I think you really do need to constrain the time in here, because the point of a prototype is to get the answers quickly. And if we spend, we're guilty as developers that we want to spend more time trying to iterate on something and really improve, because we always think there's something we can improve on. And if we let that happen, we're just going to drag out the prototyping stage. So I think, keep it time boxed, a couple of weeks or a month, whatever works to, push out a bunch of prototypes. It's like picking up on what Simone said earlier, just, get creative. If we have time constraints, just, use rapid prototyping, cut some corners. It's just meant to test a small idea. It's not going to be a fully fleshed out thing. So I think having a time constraint is really important.
I'm intrigued by the idea of non-digital prototyping, and I'd love to find out more. Simone, you touched on it there. Tell us more about the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I love non-digital prototyping, and I actually have a good story what I did quite a while ago, and I'd love to share, because there's so much benefits from it. And so I worked on a game called Risk Factions for Xbox Live Arcade and PSN, and each of map combination on that was I printed out myself and got the team to get the board out, get the pieces and the dice, and actually play it physically. And as we was playing, we kind of noticed nobody was taking the central territory. Why is nobody going for that? And we realized it was failing to engage them. It was because it was open and very risky. So we thought, right, okay, there's a problem here, we need to fix this. And so we put in map features, and these map features give the player a risk for that, a reward, sorry, for that risk. And map features were born. We put in a missile silo, a volcano, and a dam, and each of those was like a power-up almost. So as a direct result of that non-digital prototype, we'd made it better for both the players and the developers, because we'd ultimately made that experience so much better, and then obviously saved development time, because we'd not even put the maps into 3D yet. So there was an actual solid foundation of the gameplay before we'd even gone digital. So yeah, for me, non-digital is the saving time and resources. It's got fully being able to experience that gameplay and certain mechanics in real life. You can quickly establish whether something works. Failing is good because it guides you to what's right? There's no technical skills involved, so a lot of people can get involved, and it can be more direct in terms of feedback. So sitting around and playing with somebody gives you that face-to-face time, and being able to see expression and emotion, reaction sooner rather than you would digitally, if you know what I mean. And there's lots of ways to prototype, right? You know, you've got you can prototype buildings out of cardboard. You know, get them blank cards out. You can create, even if it's not a real life game like chess, you can say get a prototype a skill tree with blank cards very quickly and quickly chop and change things around. So yeah, I absolutely love non-digital. I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks of that.
Yeah, fellas, any examples of you know where it's appropriate for you, and anything you might have done in the non-digital space?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just want to start by saying that Risk Faction is my favorite version of Risk, so thank you for that. But also, yeah, I absolutely, yeah, I'm also big on board games, and I think that like thinking of games as like boiling it down to like board game components and board game mentality helps immensely when developing these kinds of prototypes in physical space, especially when you're talking about player interactions, because die rolls are effectively a random generator that you would have in a game. Player movement on a board would be something that you would do in a digital game. So a lot of things can be boiled down to what would that be represented in a physical space. And I think the only thing that you cannot really prototype in a digital space, but you can in a physical space, is the player interaction. Put people sitting next to each other and have them talk about how would they interact in this kind of situation, even if you have just bare bones UI that is made out of like paper. And then you can see like people behaving, and then you can make some educated decisions based on that.
Yeah, fellas, any examples of getting the paints and the paper and the scissors out and making a game?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that this is a really personal topic. You know, some people really enjoy just using the pen and paper, while others enjoy making presentations or whatever might be the best way to represent their idea or the concept that they have. In our company, we have a thing that we call the game development funnel. So basically, anybody who works at Fingersoft has 2 weeks a year to spend on any kind of game concept that they might ever want to develop. We have monthly demo days where 1 day a month people can just work on whatever they feel like might be worthwhile. They might be developing their skills. They might be working on new concepts. They might be forming teams, stuff like that. And essentially, the format is entirely free to decide for the developers. Some developers just take the whiteboard, and I mean whiteboard is wonderful because you have magnets, because you have the sort of like pencils and stuff, and it's basically maybe the best way, at least personally, I think that the whiteboard is the best way for like visualizing what you have in your head before you're actually making it to be anything else. I do not think that within our company we don't have I don't think that we have any kind of specific culture in using clay or sort of like offline prototyping methods. But in general, many of the developers actually they just use Unity to build something as a digital prototype. Sometimes others might come up with presentations. Others might come up with game design documents, or the format is entirely free, but it's really up to the developers. But I would say that in general at Fingersoft, the majority of the prototypes are either concept art developed by the artist, or just simple APKs built with Unity. And then we're going to have a monthly session where we will all play the games or listen to the pitches, and hopefully something moves forward.
I can't really add much to what previous speakers said, because we don't focus on games which can benefit from real-life physical prototyping, boardly games main. But I completely agree with them.
Brian, physical prototyping, something that crops up, that a technique that you use?
Yeah, I think, well, we're fortunate that our game involves a lot of physical activity. So like when we were developing the early prototypes, it wasn't very much in any digital form at all. We had printouts of maps, and like we did some research, wrote down notes and everything. And we were essentially, trying to experience that by running around, using our notes, etc. So it was a very much physical experience. Then that's not necessarily applicable to all types of games, so I understand that. But yeah, for us, we used it quite a lot, and it's been really helpful just trying to understand what the experience is going to be like, where we can kind of use our imagination to try and figure out where the digital component comes in, things like that. So it's been like super helpful, and it was really low cost. We just needed some pen and paper. There was no development time spent. It was really quick, and we get honest feedback.
Just to move on, there's an English expression, to kill your darlings, which is to be harsh to something that you absolutely love. Just because you love it doesn't mean everybody else loves it. I'm interested in any examples where prototyping has highlighted the fact that something just ain't going to work no matter how much you love it. Do you have anything where that might have happened?
Yeah, I actually have a recent anecdote from our work. So we've been working on this kind of bracelet controller. It doesn't. I don't know how well it is, but it's like a inch by inch kind of a touch surface. And when we first started prototyping it, like 2 years ago, we had no idea of what kind of input methods we would eventually be able to have. So me as a designer had to approach designing mini games and interfaces with having no access to the actual end hardware. So there was a mini game that was all about like tapping the touch surface. And ultimately, tapping is the only thing that doesn't work on this thing. Basically, everything needs to be a swipe, so that had to be scrapped completely. Even if it had been like designed and tested in Unity with like mouse controls to kind of test it out, no, it didn't work at all. So ultimately, yeah, it's the experience, the hardware limitations, sometimes software limitations that direct us to notice whether it works or not. Sometimes you notice it very soon, sometimes you notice it very late, and hopefully sooner the better.
Daniel, an example of where you've had to lose something that you loved, but the prototype said no.
It is the games industry, way too many. So actually back to the previous point about the constraint of time with prototyping, I think that's probably a company culture kind of thing. So companies like Supercell, also ourselves, were obviously a lot smaller than Supercell, but we have the same philosophy where we basically give the full freedom to the developers to work on what they feel that will be good. Of course, there is said to be some kind of boundary, there always has to be, but the main point is that if I was a CEO of a startup with VC money behind me, I would probably be a lot more careful than, for an example, we are right now. So we really want to give the full freedom to developers. Sometimes it backfires. So actually just recently we killed a game that was in development for a little bit over 3 years, which is an astonishing amount of time for a free-to-play game, right? I mean, usually you're supposed to release the game after 6 months, after 12 months, and then, get into live ops mode and then start working on it. But basically, the game turned out to be absolutely astonishing. It's a beautiful game, it is a wonderful game, but simply user acquisition is difficult. We are constrained by the hill climb racing IP. So it's an organic IP, as said, with 2 billion installs. So we don't really even have to do user acquisition. Of course, we do UA, but it's not like our lives are not, on the line per se. So this backfired with us in the sense that we gave the full, complete creative freedom to the development team, absolutely wonderful developers, and we got too entangled with the KPIs. So we went into soft launch, and then the development team started chasing KPIs, and they started chasing, how can they improve retention. They started adding new meta gameplay mechanisms instead of focusing on the core gameplay. They started checking out, how to improve the monetization with login calendars, whatever engagement mechanisms there might be. And that was a mistake that we just recently made, and I would like to think that we definitely learned from it. So next up, the way how we will be working is that there will be the creative freedom, but we have to have some kind of concrete roadblocks, to build on. So yeah, that's at least one game title that we have killed. There's been tens of games we have killed in the past, but this is probably the biggest investment we have made so far. And we don't regret anything because, the game turned out to be beautiful, but in today's mobile gaming world, it's not enough for you to have a good game. You need to have a game that monetizes.
Do you think you could have foreseen this earlier and killed it in a prototyping stage?
Probably yes. Yes. It's actually an interesting project because the core gameplay changed many times. So originally it was like a racing battle royale game, and then it turned out to be something entirely else. And basically what the team ended up with was a real-time PvP racing game that's gonna be essentially like Mario Kart, so 3D and special abilities, power-ups, direct interaction with the other players and so on. And it really felt like a lot of fun. But maybe the mistake that we actually did is that once we already had greenlit the game, we didn't really focus on these concrete KPIs and these concrete targets, because we were just considering that, it's an amazing team, and they really are, don't get me wrong. But we maybe should have considered to prototype a little bit more about the meta side of things and set the targets and basically make the roadmap so that the targets might be reached via these new updates that we will be making, instead of just getting into this limbo of making update after update and trying to increase one KPI at a time. So that was probably something that we could have avoided if we had been a little bit more vigilant in terms of the constraints and the overall first phases of the whole game development.
Actually, sorry, quick comment on that. I think that a lot of studios forget to prototype their meta layer as well, because they focus on the core loop as like, okay, the core loop has been tested and it's prototyped, so now we just do the things that we know that it work for the meta or the secondary gameplay loop, and then they forget to properly do a prototype of that as well.
Absolutely agree, and I would say that we're also similar. Maybe nowadays, I mean, for example, we are working on Hill Climb Racing 3, which is easily the most ambitious game that we have ever created. And it's going to be real-time PvP, 3D. We also have another Hill Climb Racing game in development. It's an IP collaboration. So with those kind of game titles, we are trying to avoid this. So it's like we hired our first game designer after 6 years of existing as a company. So before that, we never actually had a game designer, but the game development teams were the designers themselves with like this collective vote. So the first thing that he did when he joined the company was like, okay, so we really need to have a through plan also about the meta. And, we need to test the meta side as well. And, earlier we had always been focusing on the core gameplay and seeing that, well, if it feels like fun, we're going to do some UA tests. We're going to find, 35% day 1 retention, 15% day 7, and then we will be happy. But then how the fuck are we going to build the monetization? How the fuck are we going to do the meta side? And how to build the engagement, especially for the long term? Because it's really easy to get 30% day 1 retention. It's almost enough for you to have any working core gameplay, and you will be able to reach that. But then how do you get to the let's say, 10% day 30 nowadays, when there's, 6 million games available on Google Play? The competition is super, super, super fierce. And exactly, I mean, sorry for the long speech, but like definitely also testing and prototyping the meta layer is of utmost importance, I would say.
Filipp, at the end, do you have any examples where a prototype has taught you a tough lesson, shall we say?
Well, actually, our development cycle is much close to a hyper-casual one, which means that the whole cycle can take a very short time. For example, in 1 week we can invent the idea, develop, and test. Then if you see that idea is very good, then we can take it further and maybe develop it more and prototype more features, and then take it to a soft launch and to the hard launch. But if we see that it's not working, then at the end we just kill it, not as part of development new one. So from my experience, it became very easy to kill the darling, as they say, for me, for our games. But this is true for smaller games, like hyper-casual games, like what we did, maybe some small web games for social platforms. And speak about bigger games, of course you need much more time, and you may just become emotionally attached to a game. It was the case for me like 10 or more years ago. I was like 13 years old, still in school, and I've been developing a huge game of my dreams for like a year, but it turned out it didn't get good results. But it was a great experience. Why you shouldn't focus on an idea without testing, without any prototyping. And right now it's pretty easy for me to kill ideas on the spot.
Simone, a time when you've had to kill your darling?
Well, this one's a personal project for me, actually, because a couple of years ago I decided to explore Unity and do some arcade games, and I thought, can I put a unique spin on some old school arcade games? And I created a sort of Space Invader game, and it was also purely for learning and discovery at the same time. But once I set it up, I'd played around with the parameters and the controls, making sort of 3 different levels of the same level, but with sort of different gameplay, if you will. So the controls were slightly different in each of them. The enemies spawned differently, and the hardness and the difficulty of it. And I'd like showed my friends and my family, and I didn't really get much like. They kind of say it was hard, so I had to kind of like kill that darling, if you will. But I don't believe that any of our darlings are ever really killed. I always believe that something could fit, somewhere else. I think it was George Lucas. He's looking for Reel 2, Dialogue 2, and someone shouted R2D2, and he wasn't even working on Star Wars at the time, but he liked that name and he wrote it down and saved it for later. So the rest is history. So I think you can never really kill a darling off. Just put it to one side, maybe save it for another time. But yeah, that's my lesson there.
Yeah, but Bryan, tough lessons learnt through prototyping. What have you got?
Yeah, sure. Like even on the current project that I'm working on, because I was quite a big fan of Pokemon Go when it first came out. From what inspired me to pursue this kind of project. Yeah, I was trying to push too much of those ideas onto like my team and the people who were testing the project, and they just didn't get it. I think I probably, like in hindsight, looking back, Pokemon Go itself didn't have a lot of weight to its like the core gameplay and everything, but it was more about the community aspect. And I think it's just like what Simone said, you never really kill a darling. You just kind of looking back and you're trying to answer the deeper question of what actually made it work. Maybe it wasn't what you initially thought of and things like that. And I think if you look at it that way, it's just much easier to kill some of these ideas and just focus on the things that really matter. And those are the things that you want to bring out forward.
Great. So I think we've got time for one more question from me, and then hopefully we can get a few from the audience. Great moments in prototyping, a time when you've set up a prototype and it's really, really highlighted a brilliant aspect of the game and it's changed your focus of the game. An example of that, has that ever happened?
Probably multiple times. I was just trying to figure out and remember like a more recent example, but I guess once again going back to our current project, nailing down movement on a new controller was something that felt very like joyous as a developer and as a playtester, because we had been struggling with the aforementioned input issues, and we were trying to figure out how to move characters on the screen with our new controller. And then when it finally clicked, like, hey, this is the iteration that we want to do. These are the ways that we want to have the character to move, and this is the kind of input scheme that we're coming up with. And when it clicked and worked, that was very relieving moment as well, because our whole game concept was riding on the fact that we get the movement right. So ultimately, that was like one singular thing that we were prototyping within the concept of the whole game being prototyped, and when that clicked, everything kind of started clicking together.
Yeah, Daniel, any great eureka moments coming from a prototype that you didn't see coming?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, as I just previously mentioned, so we're right now working on Hill Climb Racing 3, and we wanted to bring something entirely new into the franchise. And so far, Hill Climb Racing 1 and 2 have always had only two buttons, so the gas and the brake, So it's like basically a super simple pedal system where you either drive or you brake. So we started figuring out like, okay, how can we, for example, introduce driver abilities or vehicle abilities, power-ups, boosters, whatever there might be. And it was actually surprisingly difficult finding the right balance on adding new buttons, because the overlay of the HUD and the whole UI of Hill Climb Racing has always been so simple with only two button controls. So we did shitloads of prototyping with like different variations, with different placements for the buttons, different kind of like gestures, basically like swiping to activate an ability, trying to innovate like that. And I would say that that was probably the sort of like the winning moment in our prototyping, because we were able to really, really nail down like adding these two new buttons. Hill Climb Racing 3 is going to come out maybe in 24, so please don't be waiting for it anytime soon. But this was at least like one concrete example where prototyping really, really proved to the whole company and all the people who tried the game that, wow, this feels absolutely amazing. There's something new, but there's still something familiar, and yeah.
Filipp, a success story from prototyping?
Success stories from prototyping, because actually our success story is from prototyping, because every game we develop starts from a prototype. I just would like to say that, well, since we develop a lot of games for social platforms and there are different social platforms, it's very exciting to see the difference of which social platform. For example, which game will work for the social platform's core audience, which tools they offer to boost your traffic and virality factor. For example, some platforms like Facebook can offer to share your game directly to your friends' news feed, and some platforms like WeChat can allow your game to send it to your contact as well. And the difference between social platforms are one of the key factors which define which game will develop for this platform. and it's always exciting to invent new games with the platform's features in mind. Okay.
Yeah, Simone. Good things that have come out of prototyping. What's your favorite?
I think Risk was one of my favourites. I've already told that one though. I think another one is the Queen's Gambit one. I can't really say too much about it, but I will say that a eureka moment one whilst creating these puzzles, some of these mini games, was actually the creation of one of the game modes puzzles. So that's really cool, and hopefully you'll get to see that.
Fantastic. And Bryan, what do you think?
Yeah, eureka moment. I think again, looking at my current project, probably shortly after I had to kill the idea of trying to turn it into Pokemon Go or something. I think just testing different ideas. I think the audience or the people who are playtesting the app is also like plays a big role because you get to hear their opinions and everything. Because you obviously you want to create something that's somewhat familiar but different enough to make you stand out. And I think it's at some point someone just told me like, oh, it's like an outdoor escape game or something like that, and that triggered a lot of brain cells and a lot of ideas were starting to fly, and that was a big eureka moment for me, and that's kind of like our big direction now.
Fantastic. I'm going to try and squeeze in any questions for our esteemed panel. Got one right here. Fantastic. Mike, to you.
This kind of goes to Simone. Now that we are working remote mostly, how do you handle physical playtesting? Do you use tabletop simulator, etc., to work with your remote people?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is. I think you could still do some, right? You can probably get yourselves all on a call like this, yeah. But make sure you've got yourself obviously some plans in place and some things actually dished out. But I think you could basically get the same person to get the same setup you have. You could, for example, if you get a deck of cards, if you're both trying to work on a card game, you can both work together and discuss the ideas together. And then perhaps once you've got something solid, do meet. And I know it's difficult to do over the screen when you're trying to work non-digitally. But I think as long as you're sort of face to face and you can sort of hold up things, you can attempt it for sure. I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic. We are out of time. That was a great session. So I'd like to a round of applause for our fantastic panel here. Antti, Daniel, Filipp, Simone, and Bryan on the video. Fantastic, great stuff. Thank you for coming, guys. That was
Thank
amazing.
you for having us.
Thank you very much
for having us.
That brings an end to the morning's session.